Hello, in this video, we're going to go over how to get started and get set up programming with the React framework. So what is React? So React is a JavaScript library. It lets us interact with the DOM in more effective ways. So it makes it very easy for us to automatically generate the DOM, sort of HTML content. Let's make that interactive in ways that does it with sort of simpler code and does it more effectively. It provides the ability for us to organize that DOM, right? Organize the sort of the elements we're creating into what are called components, which are ways of sort of structuring the page and the user interface in ways that make it easy for us to also design our page, sort of an architect in terms of the code. And the way that React is structured is that it allows us to then easily make changes to the DOM and do this sort of efficiently, both in terms of the programming that we're doing and in terms of how fast it actually runs inside the browser. So you can look at React's sort of information by going to React's webpage, which is reactjs.org. Well, actually, React.dev, they keep changing the URL. And then it'll have a bunch of details about it has libraries and tutorials and sort of documentation and ways to help you learn and understand this. You can go ahead and use the video and the textbook for this course instead, but that set of resources are available. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, right, if we go look at the footer of the web page, we can see things about, for example, who made the page and where it came from. And what you'll notice is that React is built by Meta. So React was created by Facebook, which means that React as a library was designed to work on applications that are the scale of Facebook, right? For large interactive applications, which means that for things like the exercises and the problems and projects that you work on in this class, React may feel a little bit overkill, right? It's a little bit sort of heavy-handed. It sort of offers a lot of capabilities and a lot of functionality and a lot of benefits that really only begin showing up when you move to large scale. That said, React is a very useful framework, and most web frameworks are sort of built on or sort of designed in contrast to React. So knowing React gives you that leg up into doing any kind of advanced web application work. So I also have to flag that because this is made by Meta, that does bring up a couple of potential ethical questions about how we want to use this, right? By choosing to adopt a framework created by Meta, are we condoning that organization and its work? Facebook has a long history of being I'm just gonna go ahead and say an evil corporation, evil company, right? Facebook has a history of doing things like violating the Fair Housing Act and sort of letting people advertise houses to only, making sure that when you are selling a house, you don't sell it to Black people. They have a long history of privacy violations. If anyone remembers sort of Cambridge Analytica sort of scandal where they've been basically leaked millions of people's information. They are one of the major sources of disinformation, particularly around elections. They've been, as of this video, they've been surpassed a little bit by Twitter, but they're still sort of have a long history of, again, supporting that kind of information, disinformation. And, not to mention that they overall are doing things like being complicit in genocide in ways of, again, letting people be able to promote and aggregate that kind of information. So, sort of just overall, really, Facebook as a corporation chooses profits over, user safety, right? There's a very sort of ethical concern about supporting Facebook and Meta as an organization. So then it brings that question of what happens when we want to use this library that's produced by this sort of terrible company. This is not to say that the engineers or developers who create React or use React are bad people or unethical and all. It's really just at the organizational level, there's other things going on there. Not in the way that React is used, but the way that sort of what's happening with the systems built using React. So this is really worth flagging, I think, whenever you choose to use any kind of library or any kind of framework, is thinking about who built it and what does it say if you want to choose to use that? Are would we rather boycott Facebook and say, no, let's not use React, let's go find other frameworks as well. In this course, we're going to use framework. As I said, it is one of the most popular and sort of in many ways kind of the foundational library and framework for doing client-side web application. Everything else is kind of built on it. You kind of need to know what React is to understand what everyone else in the world is doing, sort of in that line. So it's really the right set of tools for us to learn, but we really want to be aware of where it's coming from and keep that in mind as we are working with the system. Okay, so let's go ahead and get ourselves started with React. So the important part of getting set up to work with React is that the code we write for React, the React code itself, what's called JSX, which we'll go over in another video, doesn't work directly in the browser, right? The code that we write that's like React specific code will not run directly in the browser. We can't just write a .js file and run it the way we've been executing previous JavaScript code. So instead, what we're going to do is we need to use another application to basically build us the scaffolding, the structure that's going to let us be able to transpile and run and execute sort of a React application. The current system that we're going to use to do that in this class is an application called Create React App. This was developed by Facebook as a way of helping people get started making a React application, right? It generates the scaffolding and the structuring and the configuration, all the details you need to actually create it. So there's two kind of ways you'll go about getting Create React App set up and used in your project. One of them is if you're building a brand new React app from scratch, right? You're just sort of starting from nothing. Then you'll do is you'd actually go ahead and execute the Create React App application. It's a command line application similar to Jest or similar to other systems we've used. You can use npx to start that. You go ahead and create your React app. You'd indicate the name of the folder you want to create. And then I usually throw in a use npm tag to indicate that we want to have it structure everything using Node, sort of npm as a package manager instead of Yarn. I'm not going to demo that for this video because, again, this is the thing you'll only really ever do once when you're first starting out an application. More commonly for this class, what you're going to do is you're going to work with applications that have already been scaffolded. They've already been set up using this application. Things like your problem sets, things like the project once one person has initially created it. So the way that we'll do that is that we're going to basically use the command line to install all of the dependencies, all of the sort of packages that are needed to run a React application that are sort of provided and listed out by Create React App. So if we go ahead and create a new React App application, and here's an example of one that's already been made, it'll create a package.json file that'll include all of the dependencies needed to run a React application. In particular, it includes the libraries React and React DOM, which are the things that are actually going to let us do the sort of the React code, the React library. And then it includes another package called React scripts that provides a number of sort of development user scripts that lets us be able to actually run the code itself. So this is the framework, the library that we're going to use to actually to write the code that the code will be able to be pulling from, and React script lets us then be able to execute it. So these dependencies are getting listed in our package.json when we scaffold and build our application with Create React App. So in order to go ahead and actually use them, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to use the command line to install our dependencies. So what we'll do is we're going to cd into the project that has this information. So for example, I'm now in my React intro folder, which is where this thing exists, right? There's my package.json file. And then we can go ahead and install the dependencies just like we've installed Node dependencies before in order to get our React application sort of up and running and ready to go. This is going to take a while. You will get a lot of warnings when you do this. That's okay. You can ignore a lot of them. Part of this is the fact that these are sort of using older libraries. Create React App is actually at the moment considered kind of an older approach, an older framework for getting set up. There are sort of newer, faster ways of doing that. That said, I haven't managed to move this course's material over to these new methods yet, so it's still using kind of the Create React App, which is now about a year out of date. But that's what we're going to use for this course. It'll work fine. It just runs maybe a tiny little bit slower when you're first getting set up. But what it'll do is it'll go ahead and install a whole bunch of dependencies. It'll go ahead and get all these libraries in place and ready to go. Now, importantly, if you get the sort of notice about the vulnerabilities when you install Create React App, right? Everyone see that we've got these vulnerabilities things. Ignore it. It's fine. In part because what we're doing in this class, we're really just using practice systems. We're not running anything in production. You don't need to worry about sort of like, there's no major flaws that aren't actually that important. I know it says high vulnerability, but it's not actually an issue for the kind of within the environment in which we're working. Whatever you do, I know it says to fix this. Do not run that command. Do not try to fix these behaviors. What that will cause it to do is it'll actually downgrade a lot of the version systems, right? It'll take React scripts from version 5 down to version 2, which is before the vulnerability was kind of introduced. And that will then cause all your systems to fall apart. So whatever you do, do not try to fix the dependencies. Stick with what they've got and sort of initially, and you'll be fine. Okay, once we've got that installed, then we can be able to go ahead and actually run our sort of React system. Now, because React code doesn't run directly into the browser, it has to be what is called transpiled. It has to be converted from sort of React code into browser code. And so what we're going to do that is we're going to run a server, what's called the React what's called sort of the React's live server, in order which will do that work of transpiling that code and running it to make it work. So once we've gone ahead and gotten our dependencies all installed, we're going to run a command npm start. The start command will start up a local development server for React. It's going to go run this start script that's listed right here, which runs React script's start script, which will then start up our development server. I'll start that running because it takes a minute or two for it to boot up. What this development server do is it's going to act a lot like what live server does. It's going to provide a local server so we can be able to deal with things like module compilation and be able to have different imports and exports working all together. It's going to convert all the React code we write into code that can be run inside the web. And it's going to then be able to then does a lot of hot replacing as well. So that as you make changes to your source code, it'll automatically reload the page and sort of include those changes. It also makes it so that it shows all the sort of developer consoles and output and stuff inside the browser. Once you run that code, you'll see it starting up the development server. It'll give you a bunch of warnings. Ignore them. Again, they're fine. And then it'll load up a local browser, a local, again, server, similar to what we saw with live server, usually on port 3000. Again, this is just taking a minute because we need to get ourselves up. I'm going to move it over to my demo window here and go. Okay. And once that's up and running, we then have our create React app application up and running, right? Here is the code that we're generating using React. It's our hello React work. We will be able to see any output in our developer console. There's some notes about being able, we want to try to install the dev tools. They're not needed. And we'll be able to then see sort of the DOM that gets created along the way. Everything works exactly as expected. Okay. A few notes about how this app is getting structured, right? Just so you see what's going on here. Create React app applications build their content in sort of two different sets of folders. There's a public folder that includes our HTML, right? The index.html file goes inside of public. And then we have a source folder, which includes everything else. It includes our CSS and includes our JavaScript. Media and images will generally go inside of public, but HTML, CSS, any source code that's not HTML goes inside of here. Now, the important things to note about React applications is that our HTML is really, really, really basic. So in the HTML file, there is literally one element inside the body, right? We have our HTML, we have the head. This is where we will put things like our meta tags, our title, just like we would normally. Inside our body, we're going to have a single element, which is our root div. And it's called the root div because it generally has an ID of root. There's a no script in here to say what happened, what we should see if there is no script, but generally our application is going to be just one div. All the content for our page then is going to we're going to use JavaScript to put all the content inside that div. So we don't actually write any HTML, no HTML content inside this HTML file. We're going to write it all inside of the React JavaScript code. The React code is going to then generate that HTML and add it into the page and show it on the DOM. So it's doing the same kind of things we did with DOM manipulation, but we're generating everything from scratch and putting it all there. This includes for handling multiple pages. So even if you want to have multiple different pages of your website, they're still going to all be handled through JavaScript, React JavaScript code. You'll only ever have one HTML file, the index.html, and it will never have any content. It'll always just be this div. So generally you open up this file, you fix the title, you clean up some other pieces as well, and then you close it and never look at it again. We're going to close it and never look at it again. Instead, all of your content is going to go inside of the source folder. That's where your JavaScript is going to go and your CSS is going to go. We're going to start with index.js. That's always the name of the file. That's the name of the file that we'll create, React app will create. That's where our code will start. And then we have our CSS as normal. So the index.js file, because we're working through create React app, it's going to let us be able to do things like import libraries. So we're going to import the React library from React. Again, we're importing this from a remote library, right? From a library inside of our node modules folder. There's no .js here. There's no /. We just say import React from the React library. We're also going to import a library called React DOM from the React DOM client library. I'll note that you import CSS through the JavaScript as well. Create React app actually lets you compile all those things together. So Our CSS files also get imported through here. We don't add them as links in the HTML anymore. Instead, we only import them through the JavaScript. And this is where our CSS goes. We're then going to have some React code, which we'll be in talk about sort of what that looks like and how that comes together. So that's what we're going to need to get set up and started writing React code, right? We need to have this local web server up and running in order for us to be able to actually compile and run our code and see it happening in the browser. And again, as I noted, like if we change stuff, right, if I add extra exclamation points and I save my code, it automatically refreshes what shows on the page, which is kind of handy. So create React app is going to let us be able to transpile our code, bundles, does all the importing, makes all that all work together, and then does sort of this automatic replacing. Again, the way we set this up is you're going to run npm install to install those dependencies so that we can be able to make sure that we run React. With that, you should be set up to actually start writing some React code. And so in the next video, we'll talk about how to actually do that.